A major power play is underway in Bangladesh, with India, China and the US competing for hard power. But this country is no lightweight. With a dense population of over 171 million people sharing its land border almost entirely with India, Bangladesh is crucial to the security calculus of the entire subcontinent. Today, Bangladesh is on the boil. Thousands of protesters are on the streets, thousands have been injured, and at least 151 of them have been killed. Sheikh Hasina's position is increasingly unstable. The situation is tense and the world is watching closely. Because what happens here could destabilize the entire region, giving way to yet another security threat at India's doorsteps. So what is happening in Bangladesh? What fuels the anger against Sheikh Hasina, and what is the end game here? It all starts with the liberation of Bangladesh from Pakistan in 1971. Those who fought for freedom were given a gift, a very generous one at that. 30% of all government jobs were set aside for the freedom fighters and their families. It is said that this provision helped build Bangladesh into a relatively moderate, democratic society, unlike its divorced ex-Pakistan, where religious extremism and military high-handedness rear their ugly heads. This was started by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, known as the father of Bangladesh and more endearingly as Bangabandhu, or the friend of Bengal. Hasina is emotionally attached to this legacy of her father, no doubt. But it is not just that. This quota has helped her keep her supporters close throughout the political battles with her opponents. But it has been more than 5 decades since the quota was designed. Most of the freedom fighters have passed, leaving their children and grandchildren behind. These kin of designated freedom fighters are a thin minority, sitting over a third of all government jobs. What's more, the overall job quota was set at 56%, with 30% for freedom fighters, 10% for women, 10% for underdeveloped regions, 5% for indigenous tribes, and 1% for the disabled. This has left fewer jobs for the rest at a time when the youth employment rate is staggeringly high, almost as high as 16% by some estimates. Meanwhile, inflation remains as high as 10%. So Bangladesh's economy is struggling. There is raging inequality, national debt is soaring, and government jobs, often seen as the most stable form of employment with lifelong benefits, stand at only 3.1% of the total population, making the Bangladeshi public sector relatively small for a population its size. Every year, about 4,000 government positions open up, and more than 300,000 students compete for them. That's too many. Now, in 2018, this quota was vehemently protested against. Just as we see today, Bangladesh came at the brink 6 years ago over the same matter. Hasina's support for the provision fueled further anti-incumbency, and it was quickly co-opted by the opposition. Under pressure, Hasina acted with a sweeping executive order. She removed all reservations in civil services, removing not just the 30% quota, but also those for women and other communities. This came as a jolt for the students who wanted only the freedom fighter quota to go. Now, in 2024, the Bangladesh High Court scrapped that executive order, restoring all the reservations. Fearing that the freedom fighter quota is back at Hasina's behest, the students hit the streets one more time. Amid this unrest, the country's Supreme Court has ordered that the freedom fighter quota should remain, but stand at only 5%, with 93% of the jobs to be allocated on merit. But this has not calmed those already on the streets, and they have their eyes set on Hasina's throne. Public anger has been growing against the government of Hasina and her party, the Awami League. Earlier this month, she aggravated the situation by calling the protesters Razakars. Defending the quota, she said, and I quote, "If the grandchildren of freedom fighters do not receive benefits, who would get it? The grandchildren of Razakars?" The Razakars were a paramilitary force who were backed by Pakistan during the 1971 war and carried out genocidal atrocities against Bengalis across the country. This did not sit well with the protesters, and it made things far worse than they already were. Now, Hasina has continuously been in power for the last 15 years since 2009. She won the recent elections amid a boycott by the opposition, which wanted elections to be conducted under a caretaker government. Her main opponents, the BNP and the Jamaat-e-Islami, have weaponized religious extremism. They hold a soft side for Pakistan, in stark contrast with Hasina's party, still driven by the freedom fighter spirit. But allegations of corruption do not help, and neither do the visuals capturing the government's high-handedness. And to a great extent, these protests have been hijacked by Hasina's bitter rivals. The opposition has been cashing in on this very shift in public sentiment, and their agenda is to drive home the message that Hasina's re-election may not be as legitimate as she might want the world to believe. And their mission to unseat her remains as active as ever. And this brings us to the next part. A great power play between India, China and the US is underway, and Hasina is busy managing each force while attempting to keep her house in order. It's a plate full of worries. The situation spells trouble not just for Hasina, but also for the larger neighborhood, particularly India. You see, unlike her radical opponents sympathetic towards Pakistan, Hasina is a friend of India and is New Delhi's best bet at this moment. Trade ties between the two nations have unlocked new heights. They are collaborating in the fields of energy, connectivity, and access to ports. Recently, Hasina highlighted that her country wanted India to carry out a development project in the Teesta River, not China. Hasina is also mindful of India's security concerns and opposes Pakistani influence in her country tooth and nail. Obviously, this bond goes way back. India backed the freedom fighters, including the Mukti Bahini in 1971, without which Bangladesh's formation would not have been possible. If this dispensation falls to an extremist pro-Pakistan political group, India's security calculus will fall apart on the east side, threatening its link with its northeast and Southeast Asia. China, to the north, would be pleased at this outcome, and so would Pakistan. India's risk of two-front war would become a three-front one, a death knell in the eyes of many strategic observers. It also does not help that the US is taking a suspiciously keen interest in Bangladesh. It has been increasingly vocal on alleged political violence, calling for free and fair elections repeatedly. Many see this as foreign interference. The US has always been seen with mistrust, as it was never in favor of the creation of a free Bangladesh. Now it is said that the US is unhappy with Bangladesh's tilt towards Beijing. Shockingly, Hasina was quick to accuse the US of attempting a regime change. This year, she got even more candid. Hasina alleged, and I quote, "If I allowed a certain country to build an airbase in Bangladesh, then I would have no problem." And which country would that be? She does not name it, but she said that the offer came from a white man. She goes on to say, and I quote, "It may appear that it is aimed at only one country, but it is not. I know where else they intend to go." What's even more interesting is she openly said that there is a conspiracy to break parts of Myanmar and Bangladesh and build, and I quote, "a Christian nation with a base in the Bay of Bengal." Now that's some great game, if even minutely true. But her problems do not end here. Hasina has been playing a balancing game between India and China, but this strategy is being tested at this time of crisis. Just this month, Hasina returned from China after a meeting with Xi Jinping, a day before her tour was scheduled to end. Reports say that Hasina felt snubbed by the Chinese, with no one but Xi meeting her and offering nothing but about $130 million when she was anticipating $5 billion. That's a sharp fall and a message. India has already extended lines of credit worth $8 billion to Bangladesh to wean it away from China's debt. Both New Delhi and Beijing have been funding the port of Mongla in Bangladesh, the second largest in the country. So, Hasina treats India as a friend, China as a business partner, and the US as a hostile power aiming to destabilize her rule. But while the US continues to criticize her government and extend its support to the opposition, India hopes that she stays, and China is refusing the financial support she expects from it. Under this backdrop, the frequent protests and internal turmoil paint a grim picture. Hasina is under pressure from all sides and the clock is ticking on her rule.